Introduction, a forgotten giant of Europe. Tonight, as the world around you grows still, we journey back through time to a corner of Europe often overlooked, but once immense, powerful, and proud. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania was one of the largest states in medieval Europe, stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. A vast land of forests, rivers, and strong-willed people, it was a bridge between East and West, between pagan traditions and rising Christian powers. Though less known today, its legacy shaped the histories of Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and Poland. Its rulers stood among kings and emperors, negotiating with popes, fighting crusaders, and forging one of Europe's most fascinating multi-ethnic realms. In this episode, we will trace its path from scattered tribal lands to a mighty duchy that echoed across the continent. The origins, from tribes to kingdom, long before Lithuania was a state, its lands were home to Baltic tribes, the Aukštaitijans in the east, the Samogitians in the west, and others like the Yotvingians and Selonians. They lived close to nature, farming, hunting, and trading, bound not by borders, but by shared language, customs, and belief in ancient gods. Their world was quiet and wooded, untouched by Rome, and for centuries they lived apart from the Christian kingdoms growing further west. But in the 12th and 13th centuries, that quiet began to change. German crusading orders like the Teutonic Knights and Livonian Brothers of the Sword began military campaigns to convert and conquer the Baltic peoples. They came with crosses, swords, and castles, and with them the pressure to unify or be divided. Amid this growing threat, one man began to bring the tribes together, Mindaugas. A noble from eastern Lithuania, he used diplomacy, warfare, and strategic marriages to consolidate power. By the early 1250s, he had achieved something unprecedented. He was crowned king of Lithuania in 1253 and converted to Christianity in exchange for papal recognition and peace. It was the first time Lithuania was seen as a kingdom on the European stage. Though Mindaugas' reign was short, and after his death, the land returned to its pagan roots. Still, the foundation had been laid. A new state had emerged in the east, one that would not only survive the Crusades but grow stronger with each challenge. The rise of Gediminas and the capital at Vilnius. In the decades after Mindaugas, Lithuania faced instability and internal struggle. But by the early 14th century, a powerful new ruler came to the fore, Gediminas. Gediminas ruled from around 1316 to 1341, and under his leadership, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania began a true ascent. He skillfully expanded the state's borders, incorporating vast new lands to the east and south. He built alliances with neighboring powers and resisted the crusading orders that still sought to conquer the region. But perhaps his most lasting legacy was the establishment of a new capital, Vilnius. He sent letters across Europe inviting merchants, craftsmen, and even monks to settle there. He promised freedom of religion and protection under the law, a rare promise for the time. Gediminas laid the groundwork for a diverse and multi-faith society. Lithuania would remain pagan for now, but it was not closed to the wider world. Under his rule, the Grand Duchy became more than just a defensive union of tribes. It became a state with ambition, identity, and vision. Expansion eastward, the pagan power. After the death of King Mindaugas in 1263, Lithuania entered a period of internal struggles and uncertainty. His assassination marked the end of the short-lived Christian kingdom, and for decades, the country returned to its pagan roots. But while the crown disappeared, the state did not fall apart. In fact, this is when the Grand Duchy truly began to grow, and grow fast. You see, while many countries in Europe were feuding with neighbors or dealing with internal revolts, Lithuania looked eastward. There, beyond the forests and rivers, were vast lands, home to Slavic principalities that had been weakened by the Mongol invasions. Cities like Kiev, Smolensk, and Polotsk were still rich in culture and trade, but politically fractured and often looking for protection from stronger powers. This gave Lithuanian rulers a huge opportunity. Over the next century, the duchy expanded not by mass conquest, but often through a mix of military pressure, alliances, and political marriages. Some Slavic regions, like the Principality of Pinsk, joined the Grand Duchy voluntarily in exchange for military support and autonomy. Others were brought in through campaigns, especially as Lithuanian leaders proved themselves strong enough to stand against the Mongols. It's important to remember that even as Lithuania grew, it remained pagan, the last major pagan state in Europe. While the Teutonic Order saw this as a reason for war, it also gave Lithuania a kind of independence. It wasn't tied to the Pope or Catholic monarchs. It could act on its own terms. By the late 1300s, Lithuania controlled an enormous stretch of land from the Baltic coast all the way to the edges of present-day Ukraine. It wasn't just a Baltic state anymore. It was an empire in everything but name. And the man most responsible for this transformation was Grand Duke Gediminas. Gediminas and the founding of Vilnius Gediminas came to power around 1316. He wasn't born into royalty. He was likely a military commander, maybe the brother or cousin of a previous ruler, but he was clever, determined, and had a vision for Lithuania that no one had tried before. He understood that Lithuania needed to be more than a loose alliance of lands. It needed a capital, a true political center. So in 1323, Gediminas sent letters to cities across Europe, to Lubeck, to Bremen, to Rome, inviting merchants, craftsmen, and even monks to settle in his new capital, Vilnius. He promised religious tolerance, trade rights, and safety. And this wasn't just talk. Vilnius really did become a multicultural city, with Lithuanians, Ruthenians, Poles, Jews, Germans, and others living side by side. At a time when most of Europe was still divided by religion, Gediminas tried to play both sides. He stayed officially pagan, but welcomed Christian traders and kept close diplomatic ties with Catholic and Orthodox rulers alike. He even corresponded with the Pope, expressing willingness to accept Christianity, but on his terms. Of course, this didn't stop the Teutonic Knights from attacking his lands, but Gediminas managed to keep them at bay through a mix of military strength and smart alliances. Under his rule, Lithuania expanded further, and Vilnius began to look like the heart of a real state. When Gediminas died, he left behind not just a bigger Lithuania, but a powerful dynasty. His sons and grandsons would rule the region for generations, and one of them would go on to become one of the most famous figures in Lithuanian history. The reign of Vytautas the Great, the Golden Age. That name was Vytautas, Vytautas the Great. Born in 1350, Vytautas was the cousin of Jogaila, another powerful member of the ruling family. The two would spend much of their early lives fighting each other for control of the Grand Duchy, and then eventually ruling together. Vytautas's reign marks what many historians call the golden age of the Grand Duchy. He was a skilled general, a savvy diplomat, and someone who understood that Lithuania's strength came from its diversity. Under his leadership, the Grand Duchy reached its largest size ever, covering nearly 1 million square kilometers. That's bigger than France, Germany, and the British Isles combined. He reformed the military, reorganized the state, and even built closer ties with the Christian world. Though he remained officially Catholic, he ruled over a mostly pagan and Orthodox population and managed to keep the peace between them. One of the most important events in Vytautas's life and in Lithuanian history was the Battle of Grunwald in 1410. This battle, fought alongside the Polish king Jogaila, was one of the biggest in medieval Europe. Together, they defeated the Teutonic Knights, breaking their military power once and for all. The victory made Vytautas a legend. He had helped end the threat that had hung over Lithuania for more than a century. Later in life, there were even plans to crown him king of Lithuania, but he died just before the coronation. Still, he remains one of the most respected leaders in Lithuanian history. The union with Poland, two nations, one crown. As the 14th century drew to a close, Lithuania found itself at a crossroads. The Teutonic Order was still a threat, and pressure from the west and the east was growing. In 1385, a major decision was made, one that would change the future of Lithuania forever. That year, Grand Duke Jogaila agreed to a union with Poland known as the Union of Kryło. As part of the agreement, he would convert to Christianity, marry the young Polish Queen Jadwiga, and become the King of Poland. In return, Lithuania would adopt Catholicism, and the two nations would be ruled by the same monarch. This was not a small step. It meant Lithuania would now be tied to one of Europe's largest kingdoms, Poland. It also meant the official end of Lithuania's pagan era. Churches were built, priests arrived, and the country was gradually Christianized. But the union wasn't just religious or symbolic. Over time, it created a new kind of state, a dual monarchy, where Poland and Lithuania shared a king, but kept their own laws, armies, and administrations. It was complex, sometimes tense, sometimes harmonious, but it allowed the Grand Duchy to remain strong and autonomous while gaining a powerful ally. And though the ruling elites were now Catholic, the state still remained home to a vast number of Orthodox Christians, Jews, and Muslims. This unique mixture became one of Lithuania's defining traits, a multicultural empire, tolerance, and identity. By the 15th century, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania was one of Europe's most diverse and multicultural states. It included Lithuanians in the north, Ruthenians in the east and south, Poles in the west, Jews in towns and trade centers, and even small communities of Tatars and Karates who had been invited by Lithuanian rulers for their military skills and craftsmanship. Each group had its own traditions, religions, and languages. And remarkably, the state allowed a great deal of local autonomy. The official language of administration became Chancery Ruthenian, a Slavic language similar to modern Belarusian and Ukrainian. It was used in courts and official documents for centuries, a sign of how deeply the Slavic lands had shaped the Grand Duchy. The Lithuanian nobility often adopted local customs and languages, and many even converted to Orthodoxy. Yet, despite these changes, they continued to identify with the Grand Duchy and remained loyal to its rulers. This flexibility helped the state survive and even thrive. In a region full of shifting borders and rival empires, challenges from east and west, Moscow and the Teutonic decline. In the 15th and early 16th centuries, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania stood at the peak of its territorial reach. But that size brought new challenges and new enemies. The once formidable Teutonic Order, the Christian crusading state to the west, had been dealt a heavy blow at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410, when Polish and Lithuanian forces under King Jogaila and Grand Duke Vytautas achieved a stunning victory. That battle marked a turning point. The Teutonic Order began a slow but steady decline. Its political influence waned, and its lands were eventually secularized and transformed into Ducal Prussia, a vassal to the Polish crown. The long-standing military threat from the order faded, but Lithuania's worries were far from over. To the east, a new and far more dangerous rival was rising, the Grand Duchy of Moscow. In earlier centuries, Moscow had been a small principality, one of many in the patchwork of lands once ruled by Kievan Rus. But in the late 15th century, under the leadership of Ivan III, Moscow began to expand, unifying Russian-speaking lands, resisting the Mongols, and asserting its role as the heir of Orthodox Christianity. Moscow's rulers began to refer to themselves as Tsars, claiming to be the rightful successors to the Byzantine emperors and the defenders of the Orthodox faith. And they increasingly saw the territories under Lithuanian rule, especially modern-day Belarus and Ukraine, as rightfully theirs. Lithuania, which had long governed those lands through treaties and local elites, now found itself drawn into a long and bitter series of conflicts. Beginning in the late 1400s, wars between Moscow and Lithuania erupted with increasing frequency. In some cases, Moscow launched invasions to liberate Orthodox subjects from Lithuanian rule. In others, Lithuanian leaders fought to preserve their eastern frontier and maintain their influence. These wars were devastating, long, costly, and full of sieges, shifting borders, and betrayals. Cities like Smolensk, once key centers of trade and power, changed hands multiple times. One of the most significant blows came in 1514, when Moscow captured Smolensk, a key fortress and one of Lithuania's most strategic eastern holdings. Though Lithuania fought back bravely, including a major victory at the Battle of Orsha that same year, the tide was slowly turning. Moscow's military grew stronger. Its rulers adopted increasingly centralized power, while Lithuania still relied on regional nobility and complex alliances. At the same time, the internal makeup of the Grand Duchy created complications. Many of the Grand Duchy's Orthodox subjects felt culturally closer to Moscow than to Vilnius. Some supported Lithuanian rule for its religious tolerance. Others saw Moscow as a liberator. This identity tension between Catholic and Orthodox, West and East, became harder to manage over time. Still, Lithuania did not collapse. It adapted. It reformed its legal systems. It built new fortifications. It turned more fully toward Poland, reinforcing the personal union and laying the groundwork for a deeper alliance. But the writing was on the wall. Moscow had emerged as a dominant force in Eastern Europe. The days of Lithuania as the region's most powerful state were coming to an end. Yet, in its response to this growing pressure, the Grand Duchy showed a remarkable ability to bend without breaking, a resilience that would carry it into the next chapter of its history. A formal union with Poland and a new identity as part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Union of Lublin and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. By the mid-16th century, the world around Lithuania was changing fast. The rise of Muscovy in the east, the constant pressure from the Ottoman Empire in the south, and new political challenges at home created a storm of uncertainty. Poland and Lithuania had been united by personal union for over 180 years by that point, sharing a monarch but otherwise maintaining separate institutions. Yet the alliance had started to strain. Lithuania had suffered military defeats against Muscovy and was under increasing pressure to reinforce its defenses. But without Poland's direct military support, it was vulnerable. So in 1569, representatives of both states met in the city of Lublin, in what is now eastern Poland. There, after long and sometimes tense negotiations, they signed a bold new agreement, the Union of Lublin. This union was not just a continuation of the old alliance. It was the birth of a new political entity, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was an extraordinary creation for its time. Two nations, each with their own laws, armies, religions, languages, and administrative systems, were now joined under one crown and one parliament, the same, a nobles' democracy, where members of the powerful nobility could vote on laws, elect the king, and influence foreign policy. The Commonwealth became one of the largest countries in Europe, stretching from the Baltic Sea in the north to the Black Sea in the south. Its territory included present-day Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of Latvia and Russia. While Poland had more influence in the shared government, Lithuania remained distinct. It preserved its army, its treasury, its courts, and its cultural identity. The Lithuanian statute, a sophisticated legal code, continued to be used, and Lithuanian nobles retained their traditions and autonomy. The Union also reshaped the map. Several large Ukrainian and Belarusian lands, previously under Lithuanian rule, were transferred to Polish control. This was a sore point for many Lithuanian nobles, and it left a lasting tension within the Commonwealth. But in the long run, the Union brought stability and strength. The Commonwealth entered a cultural and political golden age. Trade flourished, cities grew, and universities and printing presses spread learning and ideas. It became a refuge for religious minorities, Protestants, Jews, Orthodox Christians, and Muslims, who fled persecution in Western Europe and found greater tolerance within the Commonwealth's borders. In an age when monarchs ruled absolutely in many parts of Europe, the Commonwealth stood out as an early experiment in constitutional governance, flawed, certainly, and often chaotic, but ambitious and visionary in its own way. And for Lithuania, it was the next chapter in its evolution. No longer an empire of its own, but now the senior partner in a vast and complex political project, one that would endure for over 2 centuries. Decline and partitions, the slow collapse. Despite its size and rich culture, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth began to weaken in the 17th and 18th centuries. Several forces pulled it apart. Internally, the system that had once given so much power to the nobility became a source of dysfunction. Any member of parliament could veto new laws, a practice called the liberum veto. It was meant to ensure consensus, but in practice, it often led to paralysis. Corruption spread. Powerful noble families began to act like mini kingdoms, and kings, elected by the nobility, were often weak, chosen more for political convenience than for leadership. Externally, the Commonwealth faced growing pressure from its ambitious neighbors, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Each of these powers had strong centralized governments, modern armies, and expansionist goals. They saw the Commonwealth's dysfunction as an opportunity. In the 18th century, the three empires began to interfere more directly in Commonwealth politics, supporting factions, bribing nobles, and spreading influence. Then, between 1772 and 1795, came the Partitions. In 3 stages, the Commonwealth was divided between Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Each time, it lost land and sovereignty. And after the final partition in 1795, the state disappeared entirely. Lithuania, most of it, fell under Russian control. For Lithuanians, it was a time of sorrow and disillusionment. The great duchy that had once stretched from sea to sea was now just a memory, swallowed by an empire where Russian language, Orthodox religion, and autocratic rule were the law. The Lithuanian nobility lost its influence. The language of administration changed. Orthodox churches replaced Catholic ones in many towns. Over time, a policy of Russification began, aimed at erasing Lithuanian identity, history, and even memory. But resistance simmered. In secret, Lithuanian books were printed and smuggled across borders. Underground schools taught children their language and history. And in hearts and homes, people kept the idea of Lithuania alive. The Grand Duchy had vanished from the maps, but not from the minds of those who remembered it. Legacy, a memory that endures today. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania may seem like a forgotten corner of history, a medieval empire that faded into the shadows, but its legacy lives on. It helped shape the cultures and identities of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Its cities, Vilnius, Minsk, Kiev, Lviv, were once hubs of this grand multi-ethnic state. Its legal codes influenced systems across Europe. Its policies of religious tolerance were centuries ahead of their time. Even its multilingualism, the use of Lithuanian, Ruthenian, Polish, Yiddish, Latin, offers a model of coexistence that feels surprisingly modern. For Lithuania itself, the Grand Duchy became a powerful symbol in later centuries. When the modern Lithuanian independence movement emerged in the 19th and 20th centuries, activists looked back to the Grand Duchy as proof of their nation's historic statehood. And in 1918, when Lithuania declared independence, it was not as a new country, but as a nation that was returning to the world stage after centuries of silence. In Belarus and Ukraine, the legacy is more complex, yet many historians and citizens there also see the Grand Duchy as part of their heritage, a shared past when their cities and lands played central roles in one of Europe's largest states. Even in today's Europe, where borders are often taken for granted, the Grand Duchy offers a lesson in how identities can be layered, hybrid, and rich, pagan and Christian, Lithuanian and Ruthenian, Central European and Eastern, military and multicultural. So as you close your eyes tonight, know that the story of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania is not just a tale of battles and kings. It's a story of resilience, cooperation, and vision. A story of how a small tribe in the Baltic forests built a state that stood for centuries against all odds. And though it lives now only in books, museums, and dreams, it lives still, in quiet whispers across the rivers of Vilnius, the hills of Kernave, and the wide steppes of Ukraine, in the memory of a land that once was a dream of old Europe. Fields of Fire, the great battles of the Grand Duchy. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania rose and survived through centuries of war. Its history is marked by battles, each one a turning point, each one etched in memory. The Battle of Blue Waters in 1362, fought near the Dniester River, saw Grand Duke Algirdas defeat the Golden Horde. It was a stunning victory that opened the path to much of modern-day Ukraine. The legendary Battle of Grunwald in 1410 was one of medieval Europe's largest battles. Allied with Poland, Lithuania crushed the Teutonic Order. Vytautas led the Lithuanian forces with fierce resolve, and the Teutonic threat was never the same. In 1514, the Battle of Orsha brought another remarkable victory. Outnumbered, Lithuanian and Polish forces outmaneuvered the Muscovites and held the eastern frontier, at least for a while. But not all battles were won. The siege of Smolensk ended in loss in 1514, and in later centuries, the wars against Muscovy dragged on. Lithuania's strength waned, and eventually, so did its independence. Still, each of these battles shaped the duchy's identity. They were fought not only for territory, but for survival, for faith, for memory, for the chance to endure. Life in the Grand Duchy, a glimpse of daily rhythms. While history often tells of kings and battles, the true soul of a country lies in the quiet rhythm of daily life. And in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, that rhythm moved with the seasons. In the countryside, most people lived in wooden homes with thatched roofs, surrounded by fields of rye, oats, and barley. Life followed a natural calendar: spring planting, summer growth, autumn harvests, and long snowy winters by the hearth. Peasants worked the land, tended animals, and passed down songs and stories by candlelight. They celebrated ancient holidays, like Kupole, a midsummer festival with flowers, singing, and bonfires. Traditions rooted in the old pagan beliefs that lingered even after Christianization. In towns, merchants sold honey, salt, furs, and fine cloth. Blacksmiths hammered iron. Bakers rose before dawn. And along cobbled streets, the languages of the duchy blended: Lithuanian, Ruthenian, Polish, Yiddish, German, echoing in the markets and town halls. Nobles, with their fine garments and heraldic symbols, lived in manors or castles, governing vast estates. They held meetings in assembly halls and rode through forests on horseback. But even they relied on the work of artisans and farmers to keep life moving. It was a society deeply connected to the land, proud, diverse, and shaped by both tradition and adaptation, faith and tolerance. A spiritual landscape, Lithuania was the last pagan state in Europe, officially converting to Christianity only in 1387. But long before and long after, spirituality was a rich and layered part of life. Pagan customs and reverence for nature, rivers, trees, and sacred groves remained woven into folk life. After Christianization, these older beliefs didn't disappear. Instead, they often merged with the new faith in subtle ways. The Grand Duchy became a tapestry of religions. Catholicism was dominant among Lithuanians, especially the nobility. But much of the duchy's eastern territory, in today's Belarus and Ukraine, was home to Orthodox Christians. There were also Jewish communities, which brought literacy, trade networks, and scholarship. Muslim Tatars, descendants of Mongol settlers, practiced Islam in peace, and in later years, Protestants found refuge during the upheavals of the Reformation. Few places in Europe at the time were so religiously diverse, and few so tolerant. While not without conflict, the duchy allowed people to live and worship in ways that were ahead of their time. Church bells and mosque calls, Torah scrolls and forest shrines. It was a quiet coexistence, remarkable in its day. Women in the Grand Duchy, quiet pillars of society. Women in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania were not always seen in the chronicles of war and politics, but they were central to the life of the land. In noble families, women often managed estates, arranged marriages, and formed powerful alliances. Some, like Queen Bona Sforza, though later in the Commonwealth period, left deep marks on the region's culture and politics. Educated, multilingual, and politically savvy, they influenced policy and patronized the arts. Rural women worked side by side with men in the fields, prepared meals from foraged herbs and homegrown grains, and carried oral traditions forward. They led rituals, midwifed births, and guided households through seasons of hardship and plenty. Women sang lullabies that carried echoes of ancient songs. They embroidered clothing with symbols of protection, and in countless homes across the duchy, they were the keepers of memory. Though not always written into history, they shaped it, quietly, steadily, and with grace. Culture, learning, and law, the heart of a nation. As Lithuania grew, so did its thirst for learning and order. In 1529, the first statute of Lithuania was adopted, one of the most advanced legal codes in Europe at the time. It established rights, protected property, and regulated justice in a way that amazed foreign diplomats. Two revised versions followed in 1566 and 1588, laying the legal foundation for centuries. Vilnius University, founded in 1579, became a center of education, drawing scholars from across Europe. Printing presses produced books in Latin, Polish, Ruthenian, and later Lithuanian. Philosophy, astronomy, law, and theology were studied beneath Baroque ceilings and candlelit libraries. Art flourished too. Churches and castles were built in Gothic and Renaissance styles. Music filled noble courts. Chroniclers preserved the stories of dynasties and deeds. Though born in battle, the Grand Duchy also became a place of ideas, a cradle for law, letters, and thought. A soft reflection, memory, and meaning. Now, as we near the end of this journey, take a breath. Imagine a moonlit path through the forests of Samagitia, a bell tower in the misty hills of Vilnius, a quiet castle ruin overlooking a river once crossed by soldiers and traders alike. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania may be gone from maps, but it remains in language, in stories, in the quiet pride of its people. It was not perfect. It was at times brutal, proud, fragile, but it was also generous, adaptive, wise beyond its age. And it left behind something rare, the example of a multi-ethnic, multilingual state that dared to imagine a world beyond borders. So rest now, with the echoes of old Europe still soft in your mind, a land of forests, laws, and long-forgotten kings, a dream that once lived and still does in the memory of history.